In Southern African trade, too many border posts, too much paperwork, the ports are too far away, and there are too many trucks and not enough trains. All this adds up to some of the highest transportation costs in the world, as much as 15% of gross domestic product. That's twice the global standard.
In fact, the transport costs contribute to as much as 50% of the landed product.
Many now recognize that's too heavy a price to pay, that the region's businesses can't be competitive without faster and cheaper transport routes.
Our cargo flows throughout Southern Africa are not to our natural ports.
So Southern Africa has begun to create corridors following the natural routes of trade to port, such as this one, the Trans-Kalahari Corridor, which now serves as a model for harmonized customs procedures, longer border hours, and public-private partnerships.
Because you've got a corridor from a major port through to a major consumer. And it's much easier to focus your efforts on that corridor because transport does not know borders.
It's got alternative access to the ports. You can move from the Copper Belt through Nakonde, Tunduma,
and the corridors are crucial to mineral-rich landlocked countries like Zambia and Botswana. Bennett Nakabindi prepares for his weekly trek along the bottom of the continent. He's been driving trucks for more than 2 decades, and the Trans-Kalahari Corridor is his route of choice. The TKC runs for 1,800 kilometers, from South Africa's Gauteng province, with Johannesburg as the region's industrial heart, through Botswana, all the way to the port of Walvis Bay in Namibia, the continent's most western gateway to Europe. The roadway is less than a decade old. Still, borders in this region are very real to Bennett and his colleagues at Transworld Road Freight as they prepare his documentation. He'll need all these papers for customs. He's carrying 77 different consignments, and he'll pass through 4 separate border posts before he reaches Namibia. He used to spend 5 or 6 hours to clear each border with dozens of different forms in hand. Now Bennett only needs one customs form common to the 3 countries along the TKC, the single administrative document, the SAD 500.
Before we used to cry because we spend long time on a custom, but now they're trying to be quicker.
What we're trying to do is we have this one corridor and say, let's spend on this corridor and let's harmonize all the procedures.
The U.S. AID Trade Hub worked with Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa to pilot the use of the SAD 500 on the Trans-Kalahari Corridor. The goal? To simplify and harmonize procedures and documentation.
You must remember that you cannot just pilot without having all the stakeholders in place. So we had to look at the process readiness and the technology readiness to say, let's take this as a pilot area.
One of those key stakeholders is the public-private partnership of the Walvis Bay Corridor Group, who hope to attract more users to the Trans-Kalahari by selling its speed.
We promised that we do have a transit time of maximum 48 hours between Johannesburg and Walvis Bay.
So will Bennett's journey allow the Walvis Bay Corridor Group to keep that promise? At 5:40 p.m., our driver leaves the Transworld Depot on the outskirts of Johannesburg. There's no real hurry. Bennett already knows he won't make it in time before the border with Botswana closes at 10 p.m. He spends the night in his truck until they open the border gate at 6 a.m.
We have right now agreed to open up to 12 o'clock between Botswana and South Africa, but we have not yet implemented that. So we'll gradually increase the hours until we go 24 hours.
Government can hardly afford to staff these borders around the clock, but thanks to an ongoing dialogue with the private sector, all the stakeholders reached a compromise on operating hours.
The solution or the proposal from the industry side was not to immediately extend from up to a 24 hours border post, but to add only 2 hours between 10 and 12 p.m., but which are crucial for the truckers to reach the border, to pass the border post and to continue going. So minimal input and additional resources required from the public side and a maximum of benefits for the industry.
Stakeholders in all 3 TKC countries worked hard to have this dialogue.
A benefit has been at least getting us together, government and the private sector, to come together to discuss and define a common agenda.
Customs and the private sector elsewhere in the region are engaged in a similar discussion to promote the Maputo corridor as an alternative to the heavily congested Port of Durban. The route runs between Gauteng and the Port of Maputo in Mozambique. Much like the Walvis Bay Corridor Group, the Maputo Corridor Logistics Initiative had to address the demands of the private sector.
Within a matter of 2 years, we've been able to really turn this into a public-private partnership of cooperation with funding from both the public and private sectors.
With the TKC as an example, South Africa agreed to extend its commercial cargo clearing hours with Mozambique until 10 p.m. And there are plans to roll out the SAD 500 here, as well as in Lesotho and Swaziland in the near future. Back at the Botswana border, Bennett may be using the SAD 500, but it's taking a while to clear his cargo. He's got so many consignments, and the process would be faster if the documents could be transmitted electronically from point of origin to all the border posts. After the hour and a half it takes to cross the border, Bennett pulls into the Weybridge station. Governments are working on harmonizing vehicle overload controls, both on the TKC and throughout the region. Bennett's biggest concern now during this 9-hour drive across Botswana is to avoid hitting the animals who stray into the middle of the road. There's no fence along this long stretch of highway. He pulls up to the Namibia border post just before 5 p.m. Once again, Bennett's numerous consignments delay this last stage of his trip. Usually, the Namibian authorities can clear the 25 trucks that pass through here a day in 30 minutes or less, and the border is open until midnight.
The procedures that were tested along the route, had proven to streamline and reduce, paperwork. And it has also reduced the cost of transportation of goods. In a way, it shortens even the route.
As Bennett crosses into Namibia, it's been just over 24 hours since he left the Transworld Depot in Johannesburg. Should any of his cargo need to leave the continent, it will do so at the port of Walvis Bay, another 700 kilometers west of here. The port has done well. It will reach its capacity in 2007. And perched over the southern Atlantic Ocean, it should be the ideal gateway to the west. But this success has less to do with the TKC and more to do with Namibia's domestic demand, along with the needs of its neighbors to the north. The TKC is still not the corridor of choice for South Africa's industrial giants.
The pure distance and the fact that you have to cross two borders are stumbling blocks to a quick move of cargo across that corridor. And then the other issue is that having Durban and Cape Town as alternative ports, people are far more used to it. It's something that they know, it's not foreign to them. And I think that's where the emphasis has to be, is to, if this corridor is going to be successful, is to change the mindset of the market in Gauteng in particular.
Gauteng is home to the region's powerful manufacturing industry. Concern about South African port congestion led to a recent study that considered the TKC and Walvis Bay as an automotive freight export route. The conclusion: the corridor would have been the industry's fastest option if there were more ships calling on Walvis Bay sailing directly to Europe. But there aren't. And it's also the most expensive choice when compared to other ports within South Africa, due to the distance and the lack of a direct rail option.
So I do believe as an additional or backup route, definitely yes, there lies merit in Walvis Bay. But at this stage, the suppliers still prefer to go the route of either a Durban or a Port Elizabeth.
Just 600 kilometers east of Gauteng, Maputo hopes to build a car terminal to capitalize on trade between Asia and southern Africa. Maputo is Johannesburg's shortest route to the sea, but its corridor has its own set of roadblocks.
The biggest manufacturing area in southern Africa, not only South Africa, is the area around Gauteng. And to get there and back in a day, which is the requirement of anybody who invests in transport to keep the wheels moving, is a minimum of 18 hours. So we must have a 24-hour border, so that a lorry that loads in, say, Roslyn with BMW exports can come non-stop through to the port, be unloaded, backloaded and back up into Gauteng in less than 24 hours.
And that border at Rossano Garcia has just extended its hours to 10 p.m., which doesn't meet the car industry's minimum. Pedro Peña says this is just one reason why the port of Maputo, despite doing well, could be doing better. His container terminal is at just over half its capacity.
The road connection is working very well, the Maputo-Witbank toll road, but we're still struggling with the railway between Maputo, Rosano Garcia and Maputo, Chiqualaquala.
The lack of an effective rail system has challenged port operations throughout the region, from Durban to Walvis Bay and north as well, especially when it comes to shipping commodities like sugar and ferrochrome, which is far more expensive to transport by truck. But rail has been a particular obstacle in Mozambique, whose transport systems were ravaged by 17 years of civil war. There was a lack of public sector capacity after peace was declared, which led to a private concession for the corridor's toll road, the N4.
Governments can get money spent on infrastructure without actually providing the money themselves. We built most of that road and we're recovering the cost of that through the tolls. It cost the government nothing.
You should have been here 7 years ago. It'll take you about anything from 4 to 7 hours to reach Maputo, and it's 80, maybe 90 km to Maputo. Now with a car it'll take you under an hour. The roads are in perfect condition.
Public sector constraints also produced Africa's first privately run port in Maputo, but the port didn't get everything it needed on time to launch successfully.
The railway, they've been talking for 9 years and they still haven't really comprehensively solved the problem.
They're parts of the same chain that clearly need to be in place all at the same time. So the champions of these corridors are taking action to upgrade the infrastructure and improve procedures. Like a USAID Trade Hub-sponsored time-release study at the Rosano Garcia border post to try and identify the bottlenecks there.
By conducting time relief study, it allows us to identify where the weaknesses are.
And this is done by all the stakeholders, which is customs, freight forwarders, transporters, and everybody else. They form a group who will go and actually do the enumeration and so on, and come out with answers.
Customs officials are already working on their own solutions to alleviate the congestion at this narrow border crossing. Larger cargo trucks are cleared further away from the actual border at self-contained customs depots. But an even greater objective lies ahead.
What we need is for trucks to stop once and to do the cargo clearance for both countries, the passenger clearance, and get moving to its end destination if we want to reduce the cost of doing business.
Plans are underway to build a one-stop border post here.
The control of movement of goods will be much easier, will be facilitated because both South African and Mozambican side will be working at exactly the same place.
Meanwhile, back on the Trans-Kalahari corridor, they break the customs seal on Bennett's truck. Windhoek, Namibia is the end of his trip, 36 hours after he left Johannesburg. Any of the goods he's been transporting destined for overseas will be put on another truck for the 6-hour drive to the Atlantic coast, which means it will have taken 42 hours to get the goods from Gauteng to the port of Walvis Bay. That's 6 hours short of the Walvis Bay Corridor Group's 48-hour guarantee, keeping their promise on a route that once took at least twice as long to complete. These new efficient transport corridors give shippers options so they don't have to rely so much on the Port of Durban, which despite its congestion and distance is still the best established port on the continent, with 34 times more container traffic than the Port of Maputo.
If you look at it as a citizen of Southern Africa, they are complementary to the port system. Based on the growth of cargo leaving our shores and coming in, one would see them as being able to take a bit of weight away from Durban.
Ultimately, this should produce lower transport costs on a continent where it can take up to 48 days to take a container from factory gate to a ship's cargo hold. Equally as important, corridors are proving to be effective trade facilitation tools throughout the region. The public-private partnerships working along the region's corridors are producing a series of best practices for transportation and customs. People like Bennett have already seen the benefit of the trade corridors. Fine-tuning routes like the Trans-Kalahari and Maputo corridors will lower the cost of goods in southern Africa by making the journey shorter.